plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. Welcome and bienvenue, welcome. Oh, sorry, wrong play. I couldn't help myself, but with all those images. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, friends, amigos, mes amis. We're delighted you could stop by our intimate little corner of the world, where we strive to entertain and enlighten you through the magic of theater, les grandes illusions, the place from which to view. Theater has always been a place of transformation, the empty space that fills itself with ideas, questions, discoveries in pursuit of truth, a place in which we view ourselves as we are, as we were, and as we might hope to be. Once filled, a theater space is never truly empty. Or why did we need ghost lights? Theater is a cauldron filled with bits and pieces, phantom dialogue, unexpended passion, heroic energy, the baggage from previous voyages exploring the human journey, just waiting for the next conjurer to light a fire under the old kettle and get things stirring again. Although Festus receives all the credit, do you know it is actually women at the foundation of the Western theater? Yes, women, the Maenads, Thracian worshippers of Dionysus who brought their frenzied rituals to Greece and uncorked the ecstasy genie from the bottle. Of course, once men got a taste of the stuff, they immediately proceeded to keep it all to themselves. This happened in other cultures too, by the way. Almost all theater grows out of religious ritual practiced first by women. It would take centuries for women to fully recover their place on the stage. But with your indulgence, I will engage in some ritual practice of my own this evening, some stirring of the cauldron, if you will, to bring forth 5 women who claimed that place with a vengeance, befitting their Dionysian intoxicated foremothers. And, like those fearsome ladies, the legends you will meet today were powers to be reckoned with on and off the stage, using their talent, energy, and intelligence to make a difference in the world around them, breaking ground artistically, socially, and politically. There couldn't be a better time to remind ourselves, to see that women have always persisted and that they have long been practitioners in that oldest profession. Not that one. Though they have been accused of it often enough. Sadly, slut-shaming is not a 21st century invention. This journey, and this theater today, began 170 years ago with the birth of my first special guest. And so, come you spirits. Direct from the New York Theater, just a few blocks away, the American Bernhardt, Miss Clara Morse. She is in the middle of a thank you speech for a benefit in her honor. It is 1909 and her last appearance on the stage. But I will cry, hold! And summon her back for an encore appearance.
It is several years since my health compelled me to leave the profession I loved so. The list of stars who appeared at my benefit today stupefied me. The American public does not throw its favorites on the dramatic dustbin.
Minnie Maddern, very embodiment of a trooper. Well, body might be going too far as we whisk Mrs. Fisk from a Bleecker Street cafe exactly a century ago. She is about to engage in a rather risque endeavor, something she never does, but which, serendipitously for our purposes perhaps, will immortalize her views on acting, especially that of acting as medium.
Today is the day I am going to sit down for an interview with Mr. Alexander Wolcott. Here, Alexander Wolcott,
The most quoted writer in the country.
the theater critic who says, Mrs. Fisk, we must have a little chat about acting. Well, with him, it will be an interview. Look, in quite a few years of acting, since I started at the age of 3, I refuse to give interviews. I don't give interviews well. Whenever someone wants to know about my work, all the characters I play, I just say, come see a show. You'll know everything.
One of the true queens of the profession is celebrating her 40th Jubilee at the American Theater. Bertha Kalish, star of Broadway, the heart of the Yiddish theater, virtuoso singer and performer, is taking a trip down memory lane in 1932. We can use some of her chutzpah now.
My sweet mother was a seamstress.
Our next guest needs no introduction. Katharine Hepburn, perhaps the best-known actress of the 20th century, certainly the most lauded and award-winningest. Kate came back to the stage in 1981 with a new play, and we are interrupting the taping of an exclusive but very short interview with a fan. It is hard to believe she has been gone for almost 15 years. But her strength and determination continue to inspire us.
Yes, Nora. Yes, I know. Just 10 minutes or so. Well, the brownies are in the oven. After all that, I'm ready for you. But as we agreed, I can only give you a short amount of time because, well, have you seen the play? Oh, well, of course you will. We open in 2 nights. It's called The West Side Waltz by Ernest Thompson, who wrote On Golden Pond.
And last, but certainly not least, an icon of the American entertainment industry, singer, dancer, actor, is being honored 40 years ago for something completely different. Her work as a civil rights activist. Eartha Kitt made her name as a slinky, sophisticated lady, but her fearless nature and her name sprang forth directly from the soil.
So, you've come to see Catwoman, have you? Well, I'll do my best to please you. But first, I'd like to thank all of you, because over the years, you have adopted me and made me feel loved and wanted. And you love to talk about me. Of course you do. You say that I am a feline femme fatale, a temptress with a very dangerous act. But most amusingly, you say that I get up in the morning, slide my feet into mink-lined slippers, step over 7 men, and then brush my teeth with Dom Perignon. The truth is, I was a Catwoman long before I was cast as one on the Batman television series.
Oh, stop. Are we rolling? Oh, I beg your pardon. Is this your lighting source? I mean, is this it? I see. Well, in that case, I will take this opportunity to move myself around a bit, if you don't mind. You move the plant over there. his new play while we were wrapping his film on Golden Pond. He asked me to consider playing the role of Margaret Mary, a retired concert pianist. Now, the part has the extraordinary challenge of pretending to play the piano live to pre-recorded music, if you see what I mean. Now, in the play, I have a neighbor who wants to move in with me to save on the rent, another musician, played by Dorothy Loudon. Well, she has it much worse. She plays the violin. We practice every day for an hour. She's coming at 2, so I have to answer your questions quickly. My fingers ache. That means it's working.
My mother made costumes for the theater and adored the opera. She took me often and I fell in love with the stage. That's a thread. My father was a brush salesman, although I remember him mostly on the violin, which he loved so much and played so well, although of course he was not a professional. There's another thread. And then I remember the Sabbath celebrations, the lights, the music, the joy. And when the music began, I was filled with the deepest sorrow, and I would run to my Nana and cry in her lap, but somehow, within that inner sorrow, I sensed, how shall I say this? I sensed an unlimited potential, gifted to me, but not for me alone, mine to share, although I didn't yet know what it was or with whom I would share it. And I would say that is how I first came to the theater.
There are so many people to thank for my career. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge some of them today. First, my wonderful mother, Sarah Morrison, who sacrificed so much so we could stay together. Working as a seamstress and housekeeper, employed at a boarding house that welcomed performers.
Not many did in those days.
I met Mrs. Bradshaw and her teenage daughter Blanche, who were members of John Elsler's Academy of Music in Cleveland. They were sure engaged me as a ballet girl in the ensemble. But when I told my mother, she was quite alarmed. Respectable church-going women do not go on the stage. But when I told her I'd be making $3 for 6 performances, she relented. And thus my career in the theater began. At Elsler's, we learned by doing and watching the great stars of the past.
Actors had no social standing, but they lived to act.
Work was harder, salaries were smaller, life was simpler. Dear Mrs. Bradshaw taught me the significance of discipline, punctuality, a clean reputation, but above all, honor the words of the writer and speak them exactly as he wrote them. I think that's still a problem today.
It's disgraceful.
An interview. Oh, no major hits in 3 years, but a new production. Erstwhile Susan opens November. An interview for good publicity to save our company. An interview is what I'll do. Here. Look, Mr. Fisk has a room in a rooming house, working his way out of bankruptcy. No, I won't be meeting Alexander Wolcott in a rooming house. I'm staying with friends in Staten Island on a sofa. He won't be taking the ferry. He will meet me here. Oh, this brilliant writer.
And the most quoted gossip in the country.
And best friends with my cousin, Emily Stevens.
Emily Stevens, the big film star.
We're cousins. We nurtured her in our company along with Maurice Barrymore, George Arliss, rehearsed them to the bone till everyone became simply legendary. But now, when she's giving interviews on her film work, she refers to me, her cousin Minnie, as her aunt. I guess that way they'll think she's younger. The amount of gossip that goes on in her drawing room with Alexander Wolcott. Everyone reads what he writes. If I can just say the right thing, it won't be turned into any kind of gossip in anyone's drawing room. Look, if Mr. Fisk can take on bankruptcy, I can take on an interview and try to save our company.
Now, I am not here as Catwoman this evening. I am here because rebels with a cause an extraordinary youth organization, has chosen to honor me for community services rendered. Now, these bright young kids have cleaned up the streets of Southeast Washington, D.C., and raised monies to purchase buildings that are now being used as safe havens, providing numerous self-improvement activities for the underprivileged. You know, back during the Civil Rights Movement, I grew an afro and took my show back home to Harlem, uptown to the almighty Apollo Theater. And I donated every penny I made from the Apollo audiences to Dr. King's peaceful, powerful movement. Because Dr. King had the right dream, equality for everyone. And Malcolm. Now, we knew each other as kids in those mean streets of a bygone Harlem. But the last time I saw Detroit Red, we had had quite a reunion while sitting in the green room of the BBC television studios in London. Now, Malcolm told me that he was beginning to understand and even embrace Dr. King's tactics. He said he was beginning to believe that a peaceful movement supported by the masses was a much better place to make our country a better place for everyone to live in. And that was the Sunday before Malcolm was assassinated.
Well, I trained rigorously from a child on. Well, I was driven, really. It was the same to me as Why Do Birds Sing? Music schools, acting schools, the Lembour Conservatory, and I was singing in the chorus of La Traviata by the time I was 13. Max Gimpel had been watching me for his pioneering Yiddish theater, and he persuaded my parents that since I was clearly meant for the stage, it was seemly that I belonged to the Yiddish theater, and safer. Well, I was given wonderful roles right from the beginning, finally earning the coveted lead role in Avram Goldfaden Shulamus. And then Goldfaden himself, the grandfather of the Yiddish theater, invited me to become the prima donna of his troupe. We would travel to Romania, and I would sing at the National Theater before King Carol I. But I had to learn the language, and I did, in less than 3 weeks' time. Well, my training had been such that we were never praised. Oh, by the audiences, oh yes, of course, but the teachers, the directors, oh no. The most was a nod. That was heaven to us, that was sufficient. And so all my life, as I left the stage, I never went to my dressing room thinking, yes, you were good. I never felt I had expressed completely and without reservation all that was within me. Now, Romania was a nest of anti-Semitism. Jewish actors were not tolerated on the stage. I had been warned that a group of students were preparing to pelt me with rotten onions and worse if I dared set foot upon the stage. I felt faint with fear and thought to run away, but others had withstood anti-Semitism far greater than this, and terrified though I was, for me there was but one path, onto the stage. When the conductor gave the signal, I began to sing quietly from behind the curtain. The theater was hushed. And then, as I stepped onto the stage, everything dropped away. Hate-filled eyes looked up and devoured me, but I didn't see and I didn't hear. I felt a fire within me. I forgot everything, and I sang with devotion, with love, and with heart. And when the first aria was over, from the loges they threw roses, narcissus, white lilies like the wings of angels. Well, it was a moment of great happiness. I had not sullied my name or my people. The Jewish girl from Galicia showed she was an artist who could and would sing not only upon the poor Yiddish stage, but on the world stage, among the greatest artists, and for an aristocratic Christian audience.
I think, perhaps, we may have put too much emphasis on this aspect of the performance of the production and maybe neglected our lines and the continuity a bit. Well, what I mean is I had a hell of a time of it last night. Well, I should say we are an ensemble after all. It was our first preview. First time out in front of an audience, mind you. Now, about 20 minutes or so into the play, I suddenly realized we're in Act 2, Scene 1. We should be in Act 1, Scene 3. We're all muddled up. Bring the curtain down. I explained to the audience, well, this is our first preview. It's a new play, and bring the curtain down. I asked, with their kind permission, if we could start over from the beginning. And, well, my dear, this went on for some time. I finally, after I declared my last, bring the curtain down, I declared, I suppose the stagehands must be having their sandwiches now. Oh, hell. I'm afraid a few folks won't be working the show this evening. Well, they bring the curtain up, don't they? When you have been on stage as many times as I have, you have the right to stop the ship if it's going over. Of course.
My friend Joseph Jefferson said there are no small parts, only small actors. During the second season with the ensemble, I was cast in a minor role. When the critic for the Cleveland Herald wrote, "Miss Clara Morris allotted the small part very well," I cut it out, folded it in a sheet of paper, took it home to Mother, who was very impressed. The words look rather dry and scant now, but then they had all the sweetness of a June rose. But the most thrilling experience I had at Ellsler's was when Edwin Booth came to star as Hamlet. All girls have their gods. Mine was Edwin Booth. The actress playing Gertrude broke her leg, and I was asked to step in.
Break a leg.
I was 16. I felt like I was being forced on him. He agreed he looked more like my father, but gave me notes for the closet scene and was very kind. After the show, I ran off to the applause, but he beckoned to me, took my hand in his, and said, "My dear, we must not keep them waiting." Later off stage, he tapped me on the shoulder and declared, "My Gertrude, you are very young, but you know how to pay a pretty compliment. Thank you, my child." I felt like a goddess floating on a pink cloud. Well, Mr. Ellsler's belief in my ability to be on the same stage with Edwin Booth only strengthened my resolve to go to New York. I decided to leave the company after 8 years and 28 productions. So I asked Mr. Ellsler if he would write me a line of introduction to 1 or 2 managers. Well, he wrote to 4 with this brief note:
If you have an opening for a young woman named Clara Morris for leading juvenile business.
Guston Daly responded,
If you send the young woman, I will willingly consider her proposal. Will engage no actress without seeing her.
When I met Mr. Daly at his theater on 24th Street, every word I spoke rubbed him the wrong way.
I know all about that.
He insisted I was a comedy woman in spite of my objection. But he engaged me at $40 a week and promised to double it if I made a favorable impression. I was not prepared for my first encounter with the distinguished members of his renowned company. I felt very provincial coming from Cleveland, wearing the best dress of the 2 I owned, especially when all these lovely young, well-dressed actresses rushed into the green room. I was sure they were wondering what this actress from the West was doing there. Well, I had been cast to play the supporting role of Blanche in Mr. Daly's adaptation of Wilkie Collins' novel, Man and Wife. So, you know, I had something to do there. But then the next morning, the prompter...
Oh, now they're known as the stage manager.
Came to my home and insisted that Mr. Daly needed to see me immediately to play the leading role of Anne Sylvester. Agnes Ethel was supposed to be playing the leading role. She was the leading lady of the company, but she had declined on moral grounds.
I saved a species from extinction. Not a single egret feather to be seen in a hat anywhere. But how do you articulate the magic that takes flight on stage to an interview? The birds couldn't speak for themselves, so I did it. All those hats with feathers dancing were everywhere, plumed, curled egret feathers. I didn't know why they were like that. I had worn them myself. The egret feathers are only curled and plumed when a mother is in her nest protecting her young. A mother egret will not leave her nest. A hunter will simply seize her, strap her down close to the nest, quickly covered with fire ants and insects of the region. Her screams attract the other egrets, all caught. The little birds are left with no mother, and the hats to be made are stunning. So, 5 years ago, everyone wanted to dress like me. And when I spoke out at the Flamingo Room,
Hotel Pontchartrain Detroit,
in front of all those fashionably elite women, there were no feathers in my hat. And they found out why. Within 7 months, not a single egret feather to be seen in a hat anywhere. And this wasn't something just nice that women were doing. We got legislation. We got it banned in 7 months' time. Have you ever seen an egret fly? I flew into the theater at the age of 3. No, let me explain. Mama would leave me when she was doing a show with Lou, my nurse. And one night I woke up and it was all dark and Lou was gone. Somehow I got dressed. I ran to the theater. The stage manager had no idea what to do with me. He just sat me down backstage. And there she was, my mother, rising out of the lily pad, right on the stage. I flew up to her and said, Lou is gone, and a nice man from the shooting gallery walked me to the theater, and I'm going to stay here with you every night. This gush came up from the audience. The curtain rang down. The management was so upset. But in 2 weeks' time, I was back on stage, playing the Duke of York in Richard III at the age of 3. And the crowning child in Macbeth with all those lines.
Now, that green room with Malcolm was quite a distance from Harlem, and even further away from the cotton fields of South Carolina, where I was born. You know, they named me Eartha because it had been a very good year for crops. But no one wanted me. So I was sent to live with my aunt in Harlem, who enrolled me in the New York School of Performing Arts. And at the age of 16, on a dare from my best friend, I auditioned for the Catherine Dunham School of Dance. I won a full scholarship and toured internationally with the troupe before starting my solo career in Paris as a cabaret entertainer. And then, in 1951, Orson Welles cast me as Helen of Troy in his European production of Dr. Faustus. And then a long list of Broadway, television, and film roles followed. Oh, I became an international recording artist with hit songs like Sassy Bull and Santa Baby. And the role of the Catwoman made me a household name.
Now look, I do have a bit of history in theater, in live performance. I mean, of course, I went to Hollywood, but I started out in the theater, for God's sake. I know how terribly wrong things can go. I was fired from my first job. Well, my first real role was in The Big Pond. Ponds seem to have a reoccurring theme in my career. In Great Neck, Long Island, of all places. Now, I was hired to understudy Lucille Nicholas. Well, after a couple of days, they asked me to read, and I replaced her. I was suddenly the leading lady with very little experience, just filled with a wild confidence based on nothing but energy and ego. I was terrified. I arrived at the theater 10 minutes before half hour. Not good. As the play began, I got a few laughs and overconfidence flooded in. My voice went up, my tempo increased. Apparently, and that is apparently to everyone else but me, I became very difficult to understand. Too high, too fast. Well, no one said a word to me that night when I left the theater, but the next day, I received a telephone call from my vocal coach, Frances Robinson Duff. She asked me to stop by and see her on my way. Well, I was afraid I'd be late for the matinee, but oh, when I saw her long and very serious face, I knew. I've been fired. Oh, how embarrassing. They hired Lucille back and offered me the understudy job. I said no. I went back to my family in Connecticut with my tail tucked between my legs, and we laughed it off. Well, 2 days later, I received not one, but 2 telephone calls from J.J. Schubert and Arthur Hopkins. They had seen me and thought I was good. Within a matter of days, I was offered my next job. As they say in New England, don't like the weather? Stick around. You see how quickly things can change, just like that.
Oh, yes. During rehearsals for Man and Wife, I entered with a crowd of guests. But on opening night, I heard my cue and stepped forward, and Mr. Daly's hand was on my arm, holding me back until he loudly whispered, "Now, now." I went on alone. Without the crowd of guests to protect me, I was in a panic. Oh, God, I thought, help me in my hour of need. The scene was a croquet party. Lady Lundy said,
I choose Anne Sylvester.
I opened my lips and no sound. Finally, in a rather husky whisper, I said, "No, thank you, Lady Lundy. I choose not to play." Well, later, when my confidence returned, I was amazed at the audience's response. They interrupted the play with applause. What bad manners! But then I saw Mr. Daly waving his hands, coming for me, yelling,
Go on, they want you.
Me? I felt ashamed, like I was upstaging my fellow actors. But then he pitched me on the stage to acknowledge the audience.
Well, my joy did not last long. Never in my life did I experience hatred toward Jews greater than when I began performing in Bucharest. The aristocrats who greatly enjoyed my singing felt nevertheless that their holy place must be Jew-free. The name Bertha Kalish disturbed their peace, and a quiet but intense propaganda campaign began to rid their theater of the non-Romanian element. Well, an American theater manager, Joseph Edelstein, who ran a leading Yiddish theater in New York, had heard of my great success, but also my perilous situation, and he'd come from America expressly to bring me over. He made no secret of his mission, saying, "You're not safe here. If you come, you'll get rich. You'll have palaces. It's your America. But give up the National Theater? Oh, no, I thought I couldn't do that. To give up all that I'd worked for? To unfurl the white flag and retreat from the battlefield? I couldn't convince myself to do it. Well, finally, a good friend in the theater told my husband,
They're planning to murder your wife. Protect her.
and so at last I was persuaded. We left a note for the manager of the National, explaining our need to break my contract. We packed in the night and hurriedly left Romania. And in New York, a new life began.
Now, if you think being Catwoman is hot, imagine me, little Eartha May Keith, one of 50 distinguished women invited to the White House for lunch by the First Lady, Mrs. Lady Bird Johnson. Now, according to that invitation, we women were to address the nation's juvenile delinquency problem. And, well, at first, upon receiving that invitation, I thought it was going to be, you know, another one of those Hollywood times in DC. And so I had no intention whatsoever of attending. But then I thought, why not? A group of 50 smart, outstanding, nurturing women, mothers, wives, daughters, sisters. We women will come together, brainstorm, and we will find ways to better protect and educate our children. So, I was dropped off at the east entrance by a fancy chauffeured limousine, compliments of the White House. And you cannot imagine how nervous I was, passing portrait after portrait of American presidents. But I found comfort in the proud faces of dark servants, smiling at me, greeting me, welcoming me, and extending their white-gloved hands out to welcome me, one of their own. And then out of the blue came President Lyndon B. Johnson, looking like a real Texan cowboy, tall, strong, fearless, speaking with that unmistakable drawl. He said he wanted all of us ladies to go back to our communities and tell everyone what a wonderful family we have living in the White House these days.
She means 1968.
Yes. And then he said the floor was opened for a brief Q&A. I raised my hand, the president acknowledged me, and I asked, Mr. President, please tell me, just how do you intend to help the thousands upon thousands of single mothers who must work 2 and 3 jobs in order to make ends meet? Well, that room went silent. And the president, stunned and speechless. And then his entire security detail surrounded him and whisked the president away. Well, I thought I'd have better luck with Mrs. Johnson. But during the luncheon, the only thing those ladies talked about was how they had intended to beautify America. So I kept raising my hand until finally Mrs. Johnson nodded. I thanked her and said, I had not come to the White House to find ways to beautify America, but to find out why there was so much juvenile delinquency in our country today. And then I added, but if you want to beautify America, then beautify her with better schools, more jobs, decent homes, and equality for everyone. And well, after a little back and forth, I finally got to the point. Mrs. Johnson, young Americans are angry because of this ugly Vietnam War. Our kids don't run away from home and become hippies for no reason at all. They're rebelling because they're scared, so they smoke pot and get high. Because you send the best of this country off to be shot and maimed. Well, again, that room went silent. Now, remember the fancy limousine that had brought me to the White House? Well, it mysteriously disappeared. So, I hopped into a cab and heard this on the radio.
Eartha Kitt makes First Lady cry.
What better place to raise a child than on the stage? You see, it's just so practical when you're a child. You just do it. You don't talk about it, and they don't want you to talk about it. But now, I have to talk about the passion of acting. Well, when there's passion, there's no talking. All these little fights erupted outside my little dressing room door at 17, starring in Fogg's Ferry, Broadway. Oh, the passion, David Belasco, Charles Frohman.
2 icons of the American theater.
There they were. The passion flowers were flying everywhere. They were fighting over who would give me their bouquet first. Well, Charles Frohman stuck a few flowers in my hand, followed by David Belasco with a few stalks left. we would all end up working together with Harrison Gray Fisk. Oh, the young, dashing editor of the New York Dramatic Mirror. His review said,
Minnie Maddern's acting is perfectly natural, and she should be playing much deeper roles.
well, he was 12. Not when he wrote the review. No, when he first saw me opposite Junius Brutus Booth Jr. as Prince Arthur, I was 9. We were both obsessed with the theater, both from about the age of 3. We just insisted it had to happen. And everyone in our company was insane for Harry. He's my husband since 1890. But even now in that rooming house, Harry looks like he was born in evening clothes. We were obsessed with freedom in the theater, taking on the impossible time and again, over and over, taking on the impossible for the first time with Heinrich Ibsen. Oh, the American critics dictated.
Hard-working men need the theater for entertainment and enjoyment. After a hard day's work, they should not have to go to the theater to think.
Well, we wanted them to think about these women of Ibsen who don't know their place in society. With only 2 productions of A Doll's House on the American stage in 20 years, we had to do it. You see, with Ibsen, there is no acting. You break the presentational style, so there is no acting. Oh, Maurice Barrymore whispering to me, Mrs. Fisk, you're turning your back to the audience during your long speech to me. Yes, why am I speaking if not for you? The audience needs to see the response I'm getting from you. We weren't spotlighted. The material was. Every angle and depth was Ibsen's story, and we were so lucky to be a part of it. And everyone in the company, rehearsing endlessly, was becoming legendary. How do you talk about that kind of acting? The critics simply said, by Jove, one after another. It was something bigger than all of us.
What made me want to go on stage in the first place? Well, when I was a child, I had a little theater made out of a wooden box. It had a floor with lines cut into it, every half inch or so, painted green, parallel to the front. I could stand the scenery and the actors in the cracks. And, oh, I made up little stories. I even had a curtain, which I could open and close. The truth is, there were opportunities open to me if I wanted them. Oh, I could have been a surgeon, like my father. I loved golf. I loved all sports. And Mother didn't really care what I wanted to do, just so long as I didn't settle for the old routine of playing nursemaid to the rising generation. Oh, my parents were very intelligent people, liberals. My father worked tirelessly to eradicate venereal disease, and Mother was a suffragist. At the age of 3, I was holding a banner, marching with her. Oh, she wanted women to get out there and give it a whirl and try to be more independent of men. She went to Bryn Mawr, and she wanted me to go, and I did. I was very awkward at first. I wasn't used to being in school, but then I made new friends, and we started doing plays. Oh, this was great fun. We laughed a lot. I played Pandora in The Woman in the Moon. Pandora was a wonderful part. She played under different moods, under different influences of the planets. I was warlike under Mars, loving under Venus, tearful, funny, with my long red hair, white flowing gown, barefoot. My rather militant Pandora made quite an impression on the faculty. Well, it was back then, in school, doing those plays, that I decided I was going to be the greatest actress in the world. Well, if you have to support yourself, you better bloody find something to do that's fascinating, right? And you don't do that by sitting around all day, do you?
After my debut in Man and Wife, I worked with Mr. Daly for 3 years. The governor, as he liked to be called, expected the members of his company to treat him with reverence. Well, I respected and admired him, but he never felt I revered him enough. But when I didn't share confidential information to members of the company about a great part of the play for me, he gave me my own dressing room. The great part was Cora in his revival of Article 47. It gave me the chance to convince an audience how a woman scorned can lose her mind. Her husband had shot her in the face, creating a terrible scar. I found the scar on a woman in a Broadway car. But then I thought perhaps it would be better if I covered that side of the face with a veil. Now, Mr. Daly didn't think so at first, but then he discovered that, sure, if it was covered, people in the audience would imagine it 100 times worse than it was. Oh, and I must thank Albert Marshman Palmer, who engaged me for a season after I left Daly's company, increasing my salary and letting me tour with some of my more well-known roles. But he also offered me the starring role of Camille, a part I really didn't think I was right for. But after intensive preparation, my interpretation would show that she allured men by the very refinement of her vice. Well, I understand the divine Sarah Bernhardt, another great Camille, attended a performance and exclaimed, "She was not acting, she was suffering." And my reputation as one of the most emotional actresses of the 19th century was assured.
I almost forgot. Leslie Howard had me fired in the Animal Kingdom because I was exactly 1 1/4 inch taller than he was. He called me a beanpole. He said, "I can't work with someone taller than me." Oh my God. But the truth is, I was not good. You are fired if you are not good. That's usually how it works. But I had a pair of secret weapon high heels made just for me. Oh, it really gave me an edge over those men when I needed it, especially in Hollywood. MGM, I towered over them. It really worked. Well, not with Leslie Howard.
Well, I played all the Yiddish theaters in New York. There were 13 at one time. My repertoire eventually consisted of well over 100 roles, including Hamlet. But in the beginning, there were pageants with religious themes and adaptations of Shakespeare that Yiddish audiences could relate to. In the beginning, Yiddish audiences were unsophisticated and uneducated, having come from Poland and Russia and Austria and Germany, where they were routinely subjected to stifling anti-Semitism and brutal pogroms.
Government-authorized slaughter.
Here in New York, immigrants spent all day in the sweatshops slaving for pennies. The theater at night was their respite, their release, their whole social life. Goldfaden said they wanted only a song, a slapstick, a quarrel, a kiss, a jig. He was a teacher, a dramatist, but also a brilliant teacher, and he knew that he had to reach his audience at the level they were at, and so he did, and gradually they became educated, both to the idea of theater and to educated ideas. But for me, the humanity of those immigrants was and will always remain unutterably touching. Even after I became a big star on Broadway and with English-speaking audiences, I kept returning to the Yiddish theater. It was my home, and I felt a responsibility for its continuation and development. I feel I act as well using the English tongue as the Yiddish, but Joseph Rumshinsky wrote in an article that he wrote about me that when he watched me on the American stage, he thought to himself, yes, she is a magnificent artist in your tongue, but you don't know what she's like in her native Yiddish. You find her sincere, mobile, spontaneous, good, but you will never know the inner reaches of her heart. Well, perhaps he was right. And from my heart. I must talk about Gordon. Jacob Gordon. A brilliant man of incredible integrity, striking looking with piercing eyes, who began what I like to think of as Act Two in the history of the Yiddish theater. He was Russian, extremely well-read, a teacher and a dramatist, and he raised the level of Yiddish theater and acting still higher. He brought more serious subjects to it, and his plays were character-driven. Now, Yiddish theater began as vaudeville, and even the most serious of actors feared that to omit an improvised line or a song, something thrown to the masses to hold them, would result in box office failure. Well, Gordon changed all that. If Gordon wrote a play and came to a rehearsal, or God forbid, a performance, and a line were improvised, he would storm onto the stage screaming, "That's not in the script!" But the best of us, Jacob Adler, Kenny Lipson, Kaminska, we knew the gift that he gave us. Kaminska said that he was her Messiah, and Jacob Adler himself said that he would have been nothing without Gordon. Imagine that. And I adored him. He wrote the role of Etty in the Kreutzer Sonata for me, and also the title role in Sappho, especially for me.
Now, when I returned to LA from DC, I was greeted at the airport by a throng of photographers, reporters, and spectators who battered me with questions about the luncheon. And for weeks, my telephone rang and rang. Dr. King called and said how proud he was that I had said the right thing at the right time and in the right place. My dear friends, Sammy Davis Jr. and Gore Vidal publicly praised me, but others said that I had gone too far. And then one day, the telephone stopped ringing. There were no calls, no friends, no visitors, no anything. And I had committed no crime. I had simply exercised my freedom of speech. But because of that, this outspoken negress had to be put in her place. Eartha Kitt had to be erased. I was investigated by the FBI, and the CIA compiled a dossier claiming that I was a sadistic sex nymphomaniac with communistic ties. My telephone lines were tapped, and all of my contracts were canceled, lost, discontinued, or otherwise made void. Now, I later learned from a New York Times investigative reporter that it took President Johnson less than 2 hours to erase me, to make me disappear from the entertainment world. Less than 2 hours to put me out of business in America for 10 long years. So I went back to work in Europe, in South America, and even in apartheid South Africa, where my daughter Kit, whose skin is much lighter than mine, was allowed entrance to a whites-only amusement park, but I was ordered to leave. Now that event made headlines all over the world, embarrassing the park's owner and the South African government. And once again, I went back and forth with them. And within a few days, those signs were removed, allowing all children to enter the park regardless of their background. And the park's owner even gave a hefty donation to help build schools for Black South African children.
And one by one, theaters were shut against us. You see, when you have a producer by the name of Claw and Erlinger took control of all the theaters, actors, managers throughout the country. Of course, we were invited to join. They would take all of our productions,
make carbon copies, and of course,
reduce the salary of Mrs. Fisk every year. Because every year, Mrs. Fisk will be getting older.
well, we declined. Mr. Fisk and I became obsessed with working free from the trust. What we found was a novel by Thomas Hardy, Tess of the D'Urbervilles. The American critics went insane. A fallen woman to be star on an American stage. Inconceivable, impossible. Blasphemy, my Aunt Betsy said. Minnie, don't you dare. You don't act, and everyone will think you're some kind of a prostitute or something. Well, that's why we just had to do it. In a theater, the Manhattan Theater. Somehow Claw and Erlinger had missed it at 27th and Broadway on March 2nd, 1897 at 8 p.m. The curtain rose on Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and America had found its Dusa. Well, I would beg to differ. I've seen Dusa act. No one can quite reach her level, not even you. But America had found its own voice, its own style in what we were creating, and everyone was becoming iconic. The rehearsals were endless till everyone was too exhausted to pretend they were acting. That's how you do it. How do you give an interview on that? You can't. You just do it over and over, anywhere and everywhere. Churches, tents, skating rinks, all across the country.
Today I was thrilled to be playing Lady Macbeth in her sleepwalking scene. My controversial interpretation was hotly criticized. I was to follow in the footsteps of Sarah Siddons and Charlotte Cushman, but I couldn't believe in the traditional white sergeant of a woman who speaks in great stomach tones and splashes about in blood as though she were used to it. I thought that her reliance on the witches and her eager need for evil spirits only made her able to repent her wrongdoing. But she does not want the access and passage to remorse stopped, so she can do the awful deed. Come, thick night, and pall thee in the dunnest smoke of hell. Let my keen knife see not the wound it makes, nor heaven peep through the blanket of the dark to cry, hold, hold. Afterwards, I heard that my interpretation reached the ears of Charlotte Cushman, who said,
I like this girl's pluck and standing up for her own idea. For years, I have recognized the womanliness of Lady Macbeth.
I have always believed that the stage is a practical occupation for women. Actresses, no matter how small the role, are all a part of a whole. Then they have time for self-improvement and always can look forward to the next thing. So I give thanks and honor to the profession that not only fed and clothed me, but educated me too. Thank you, my friends. God bless.
In 1938, after a string of flops in Hollywood, I was queen of box office poison. I decided I better get back to New York and do a play. Oh, I managed to buy out my contract with RKO and avoid a dismal film called Mother Carey's Chickens. Can you imagine? Now, Phil Barry, who wrote Holiday, which I had done on loan to Columbia the year before, approached me with an idea for a play inspired by me and my family. The Philadelphia Story. Oh, I went mad. I worked with Phil at Fenwick and up in Maine. Oh, we made a tremendous hit on Broadway. Tracy Lord remains one of my top roles. Howard Hughes, who wanted to marry me at the time, thought it best we secure the film rights because we knew every actress in Hollywood would be vying for the role. But it was mine. I made damn sure of it. Well, thanks to Howard, we really got along fine. I liked Howard a lot, but I did not want to be Mrs. Howard Hughes. Why Tracy Lord? Well, because she is everything I love and detest about myself. She is strong and vulnerable, and sometimes at the same time. And there is a happy ending. My advice to young actors, well, everyone wants to know this. I say practice, do it again, Rose, get it right. Spence didn't believe in that. He said, learn your lines, save it for the camera. I also think you shouldn't limit yourself. You can imagine my amazement when I was asked to star in a Broadway musical. Me! I can't sing, I can't dance, but I was wonderful in it. Coco. I played the legendary fashion designer Coco Chanel. Now what if I had said, oh no, I can't do that. I won't do that. If you play by all the rules, even your own, you can miss all the fun. Oh, the brownies are done. And unfortunately, my dears, so am I. Yes, Nora, I'm coming. Just a moment.
And in Denver, you play every angle to get around Claw and Erlinger. Play every angle to secure a penny ante house. The stage seemed to be close to 2x4 for Becky Sharp with its enormous second act ballroom scene. How would they do it? The curtain rose on Act 2. This gasp came up from the audience. The entire breadth of the ballroom stood before them. Gales of wind blew in. Snowflakes covered the audience. We had removed the back wall of the theater to accommodate the breadth of the ballroom. No one left. It was the theatrical event of the season, time and again. And after 12 years, the Theatrical Trust finally folded. 12 years in the wilderness, one-night stands, a lot of wear and tear on the health, but it kept us free and